Hello and welcome to Channel 17's Town Meeting Television and another in our 2018 Chittenden County Democratic State Senator Primary Candidate Forum. That's a mouthful. My name is Matt Kelly. Thank you so much for joining me. This evening we have three candidates running for Chittenden County State Senator. We'll hear from each of them with an opening statement, followed by questions that I've got formulated here. A reminder that this is a live call-in program, and it's an opportunity for you, the listener, to dial in and question the senators and the candidates themselves on issues that are important to you. If you're concerned about rising property taxes, the opiate crisis in the state of Vermont, or the state of education, dial on in and ask the senators questions that matter to you. The number is 862-3966. And we'd also like to welcome all our viewers enjoying our online stream at ch17.tv/live. We now go to our opening statements from our candidates. Joining us are Val Carzello from South Burlington, her first time running for office. We're also joined from South Burlington by State Senator Michael Sirotkin and from Burlington, State Senator Phil Baruth. Val, we'll begin with you with your opening comments.
Hello.
And what experience you bring to the position.
Okay, well, my name is Val Carzello. I'm a recent graduate of the Emerge program, which trains and recruits qualified women to run for office. And today is the 170th anniversary of Seneca Falls. So I'd like to pay tribute to all the women who've paved the way so I could be a candidate sitting here today. There's more work to do. Vermont's never sent a woman to Congress. We're dead last. Our State House Assembly does better than most, but we have yet to achieve gender parity, and that matters. When women are not at the table, we're on the menu, and considering what's going on at the federal level, I'm very concerned about that. I'm also concerned about who has access to elections in Vermont in general. I've moved out of the house when I was a teenager and worked 3 jobs as my friends went to college or studied abroad. I know what it's like to have to choose between groceries and heating oil. People always say pull yourself up by your own bootstraps without realizing that some people don't even have the boots. And people like me, and probably you, have rarely an opportunity to run for office. It's really expensive. I've been hand-making all my materials with my staff and talking to voters, making the best of it, but I can't afford the lawn size, bus banners, radio ads, newspaper ads needed for a newcomer to get name recognition. And I'm betting that most people cannot. And I can't even say I'm a grassroots candidate because millionaires running for office now use that. So call me a seedling campaign. If we truly value democracy and diverse backgrounds, we should make it easier for people like me to run, because I am one of you. I can bring our lived experiences to the State House. I'm not a politician, I'm a community member who has had enough. It is time for things to change, and we can get there by voting in unique candidates like me. People are always saying that they want something different out of government, so here's your chance. Please vote for me on August 14th. Thank you.
Very good. Val Carzello, thank you. Michael, your opening statement.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you to Channel 17 for doing this. It's an important public service. I wish there were more of them. We are sort of a down ticket race here and doesn't get a lot of attention, so these forums are important. I hope people will call in or watch it on tape as we go forward. I've been in the Senate for 5 years. I joined the Senate under the most unfortunate of circumstances. My late and great wife, Sally Fox, was a senator from Chittenden County, and I was appointed to her seat. I ran in 2014 on my own and was elected, and ran in 2016 on my own and was reelected. I have a background that started in Vermont in the early 1970s, working for Vermont Legal Aid as a senior citizen law director of that project, and have ever since been working on behalf of consumers and populist causes. I like to think that I have a reputation of working for the little guy. My legal career in private practice always was representing underdog clients, and as I grew, I took on organizational clients and worked in the State House advocating for environmental causes, housing causes, consumer, social service organizations, and made a practice out of doing that. So here I am in 2017, in the middle of the term. I had the good fortune, I guess you would say, of the chairman of the Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs Committee, which I like to consider the Consumer Affairs Committee, stepping down and taking a position in the executive branch, and I got appointed to be the chairman. So it's at the end of my career of fighting for all these consumer causes. Now I am in a chairmanship position of the Consumer Committee in the Senate. And in a state like Vermont, it's so small, and you have access to all the officials in the executive branch, in the legislative branch, and to your constituents. You can really get things done. And I'm very proud of my record, and I hope to continue build upon that record and follow up. I'm sure we'll get into some of the issues like minimum wage and paid family leave that I've worked on. We want to see those not only passed, but signed by the governor.
Very good. Michael, thank you very much. Phil Baruth from Burlington, your opening statement, please.
So I'm Phil Baruth from Burlington. Quick addendum to Michael's statement. I sit on his committee, and he's done a brilliant job in that role as chairman. So the last two elections, I've used my time at the opening to talk to people about changes I wanted to make in our gun safety laws. And that was a couple of minutes on TV both times, but I really felt it was important to try to get that message out. This time, I want to talk about what we got this session, this biennium in gun safety. The word historic has been used, and I think that's accurate. We got what amounts to 5 new gun safety pieces of law. One is universal background checks, which I had worked on for years, and Michael helped me a great deal in moving that forward, but we could never get it to go. Unfortunately, Parkland and Fairhaven happened in rapid succession. Phil Scott flipped 180 degrees from where he had been. Given his change of heart, the building itself, the State House, revolved, and I speak to you today with S55 and H422 being law. That is universal background checks, a prohibition on bump stocks, high-capacity magazines, and restrictions on purchase age. So you need to be 21 unless you've taken a registered course in safety. In addition to that, we passed a extreme risk red flag bill that allows us to remove guns from someone who has demonstrated extremely violent tendencies in their community. So all of those things taken together, I think, make a huge change. Add to that we were able to appropriate $5 million to upgrade safety in schools, physical changes like retrofitting doors and exits. But then the last thing, just before we adjourned, I was able to write a grant program with $250,000 for schools that wanted to adopt restorative justice as their disciplinary model, because you can't just retrofit schools physically, you have to change the way we deal with students. All of those things together, I think, have made big changes in safety for my kids and your kids, and I'm very proud of that.
Very good. Phil, thank you so much. A reminder that the phone number is 862-3966. You're welcome to dial in and ask questions of the state senators and candidates as well. We now move on to our question and answer period here. The way that we'll do it is we'll ask a question, and each senator, a candidate, will have an opportunity to respond, followed by a follow-up from each of the respective senators. So we'll begin with you, Val. I want to state to you that you've heard a lot about what has been going on in the State House with our 2 sitting senators, and you've gotten an indication of some of the priorities that they are passionate about. Can you speak to what your first order of business would be, what your priority would be, maybe your first law or bill that you'd introduce into the State House?
First of all, thank you so much for your gun control votes. I really appreciate it as your constituent. Second of all, I would reintroduce paid family leave and sign on to that with everybody. That would be my first priority. I don't know why Phil Scott vetoed that bill. That was ridiculous.
Okay. Michael, your response to that in terms of priorities for the upcoming biennium?
Well, I also want to thank Senator Baruth for his leadership on gun safety. I had the good fortune to sign on to the bill with him, but he did all the heavy lifting and took on all the real fights when they really needed to be fought and when they seemed to be dying a slow death. He kept on pushing that, and those were one of the big achievements that the governor did sign on to this year. I led the fight and was the lead sponsor on both minimum wage and the Senate version of paid family leave, and we got strong majorities in both chambers for those bills, but the governor vetoed them. I've already started to set in motion reintroduction of those bills. They probably will be even stronger. Minimum wage, while the governor vetoed and let pass an opportunity that I think was very measured in increasing the minimum wage over the next 6 years to $15, Massachusetts has now just passed a law that will go to $15 in the next 5 years, and they passed a much stronger paid family leave bill than we were even considering. So we have New York way ahead of us, we have Massachusetts way ahead of us. I don't understand why such populist issues that help the economy and help the vulnerable, as the governor would like to say, get vetoed over strong majorities of the public and of the legislature.
Following up then, Phil, your priorities for the upcoming biennium.
Well, I would go along with Val and Michael. I think paid family leave and minimum wage should immediately be passed and sent back to the governor. For those who think of Phil Scott as the nice guy in the race car, he is that. He is a nice guy personally. But when you work with him in the State House, it becomes very apparent that he's closer to a hard right model of governance than the center. And I say that because he not only vetoed family leave, he vetoed minimum wage, and he vetoed provisions that would allow people to sue the polluters who polluted their groundwater, let's say, as in the PFOA case down in Bennington. So how do you do that and live with yourself? I don't know. In the case of minimum wage, the stated reason for vetoing it was that it would hurt business. Michael did an amazing deep dive into the facts and the research on this and demonstrated that that would not be the case. In terms of paid family leave, if you were a minimum wage worker, paid family leave was going to cost you $70 a year, and you would be eligible for 6 weeks of paid leave in the event of pregnancy, illness, death in the family, et cetera. So the affordability agenda that Phil Scott talks about really goes out the window with his vetoes once you get looking at how they would change the lives of working Vermonters.
Thank you very much. Michael, we're going to go right on to you here.
Okay. You said we're going to have
free.
time to.
Well, and since you were responding to her, so you can feel free to follow up on his if you'd like.
I just wanted to add some of the numbers. I'm a number kind of guy, and the cost to a minimum wage worker to pay for paid family leave would have been $0.015 an hour. That's how much would have come out of that person's paycheck to provide the service. It's incredibly an inexpensive insurance policy, especially for what it provides. We're the only country in the world other than Suriname and Papua New Guinea that doesn't provide some form of maternity leave for its citizens.
I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to move on to another question here and actually bring it back to you. Because what I'm hearing here from both of our sitting senators is that there seems to be an impasse between the leadership of the state and some Democratic state senators and whatnot. So my question here is, what is your view of the inability of the Democratic leadership and the governor to actually agree on approach to try to solve these problems? You said you've been in the Senate for 5 years now. You've worked with Mr. Scott prior to being a governor. You as well, Phil, so I would be curious about your opinions on this. And Michael, we'll begin with you.
Okay. In addition to being in the Senate for 5 years, I advocated in the State House for 30 years prior to that, and I really have never seen an administration who is not engaged in the legislative process. They keep coming with their objections to pieces of legislation we work on at the very last minute. They don't share their voices, their concerns early on. Then at the very end, after it's all worked up, they say, oh, we have this big problem, and it's very hard to undo that. It seems like they're working with undue influence of this veto power. So the fact that he has more than a third Republicans in the House, he relies upon that. He says, if I don't get my way, it's the highway, and he did that on education funding this year. He did it on minimum wage and paid family leave. He did it on toxic chemicals in children's toys. I mean, it sort of relegates the legislature to not being a separate and equal branch of government. He may have different opinions than ours, but you put those out there, you get together and you reach some sort of compromise. You just don't say no, no, no. And that's what we've faced. So there are two choices in my mind. One, I felt very strongly that, as Senator Baruth did with guns, is you keep pushing the envelope in terms of saying, even though he says he's going to veto it, I'm still going to work up this bill. I'm still going to pass this bill. And God damn it, if he wants to veto it, we'll come back next year. And look at us. You're talking about it here. You'll talk about it at all your forums. Everybody's going to be talking about it because of that veto. So if we had just, pulled back the covers and went to sleep and said, well, we can't do anything about it because he's going to veto it, I think we wouldn't be having this conversation today. The second thing, which is going on, and there's a real push in the House, is if that's the way it's going to be, our response has to be that we have to have a veto majority, a veto override majority in the House, as we have in the Senate. And then we would have the balance of power would shift. So one of those two things have to happen. I hope both, but that's where we are.
Phil, you said he's a really nice guy, a great race car driver. Is that enough?
Obviously not. I think an easy way to understand this and to verify what we Democratic candidates are saying is, if you go back historically to the beginning of Vermont as a state, the budget has only been vetoed 5 times now. 3 of those times were Phil Scott. So we're talking about hundreds of years, there were only 2 vetoes. Since Scott got in, he has more than exceeded the cumulative total before he got in. So to me, that says 2 things. It says, first of all, as Michael says, that they're using the veto as their sole means of interacting with the legislature. That's just bad on its face. But the other thing that it tells me is that the Tea Party idea, which is if it's legal, you do it in service of lower taxes and fewer regulations, that has come to Vermont. And so the last 2 years, regardless of whatever movement we made in the administration's direction, they were threatening government shutdown, a little less vocally last year, a little more vocally this year, but that's the way it comes in. And the last thing I would say to people in Chittenden County is, if you believe that Vermont can't become a conservative state, I would ask you to look at the history of Wisconsin. They were an extremely liberal place. They had Scott Walker come in, not nearly as nice a guy and smiling a face as Phil Scott. They lost collective bargaining, among other things, and they went to a Tea Party model on vetoes of the budget. And I think we're, pretty far down that road 2 years in.
Very good. Val, following up with you as well, what are your thoughts on the inability of the Democratic leadership and the governor to actually work together to solve the problems that are facing Vermonters? And how would you and your voice be lent to try to help solve that issue?
Well, I'm glad you guys stuck to your principles, and I'm glad you're just going to reintroduce the bill, and I would happily sign on to that if I was a sitting senator with you. I don't think nice guys take away paid family leave from women and everybody in Vermont. I don't think nice guys take away the chance at an increased minimum wage. So he might be awesome on the racetrack, but I don't find him to be a very nice guy as a constituent. And what I'm going to do, should I not get into the Senate, is work really hard to make sure that we have a Democratic governor that will pass those.
Very good. Thank you, Phil. Michael, excuse me, Phil, we'll move right on to you with a question here. And I'm actually
Jimmy.
There we go. I'm going to actually go off script here because this was something that was brought up last night with Tim Ash, that one of his priorities is that he is going to introduce a bill for a 4-year term for Vermont governor.
Right.
And I want to get your thoughts on that. Do you think it's a wise idea? Do you think it would potentially pass? What are your thoughts?
I'm against it, and I'll tell you why. So Michael and I and Val, I'm sure at this point, knows running every 2 years is a pain in the neck. Raising money is humiliating in a certain way. And yet, I think the idea of a 2-year term needing to go to the voters every 2 years puts people who would otherwise disappear for 3.5 years in their communities much more often. So on balance, it's tough for people who are having to run all the time, but for constituents, I believe in the 2-year term, and they have a right to representation more than I have a right to my summers free, and not running.
Very good. Val, your thoughts on this? A 4-year term for the governor. Would you support a bill if Senator Ashe were to introduce it?
Well, 4 years would feel like a really long time right now to me. So I would have to really think about that because I'm afraid of Phil Scott being challenged from the right, and I'm afraid of what that would bring to Vermont. So right now I'm going to say no, I do not support it because I have fear of what's coming.
Okay. Michael, your thoughts on a 4-year term? Would you support a bill if Senator Ashe were to introduce one?
Actually, it wouldn't be a bill. It would be a constitutional amendment.
Okay.
And I would support it. I think one other state besides Vermont has a 2-year term, and it really, as upside down as it sounds, I think Phil Scott is in some way a victim of that 2-year term, and we're all victims of that 2-year term because as a result of there being a 2-year term, as soon as he gets in, he has to start thinking of the next election cycle. So he runs on no taxes, no fees, no new nothing, no new improvements, and that's a good soundbite. And it's his signature soundbite to get reelected. I'm not sure that's what he would be as hard line if he could develop longer term policies and had time to implement them. It's hard to say that with the policies he's been suggesting so far, but I think overall, when the shoe's on the other foot, when we have people who want to do progressive changes, they may need more time. There is 2-year terms for the Senate and for the House that would be ongoing, so I think that I would be in favor of a constitutional amendment. And I would also say there's another constitutional amendment that I would put in that you might want to talk about, and that affects Chittenden County, and that is whether the Senate districts in Vermont can be as large as the one that exists in Chittenden County with 6 senators running.
Very good. Interesting posit. Thank you very much. We're going to move on. Val, the next question is directed to you. It's about agriculture, and what do you feel the future of agriculture is for the state of Vermont?
I think probably family-based, less large agri. I think people want access to organic foods, and I think they like the family farm, and I like that model of family farming, and I think it's the future. I'm seeing all these wonderful buildings. They're building gardens and farms on the buildings in cities, and I think that's something that
vertical
landscaping. Thank you. Yeah, so I think that would also be the future. I think we need to utilize as much space as possible and help with runoff in the process of that. But I also like that Vermonters have access to organic food in the food stamp program at our farmers markets, and I would like to expand and continue that too.
Very good, Val. She brought up an interesting point, Michael, and I want to ask you about that as well, as we ask you the same question. What do you think the future of agriculture is? And wrap in runoff and cleanup of the lake in your response, if you will.
Well, we have a real difficult time with agriculture in the state of Vermont. I served on the Agriculture Committee for 3 years, and it used to be the famous phrase that we have more cows in Vermont than people. We're down to about 750 large dairy farms in the state of Vermont. It's just really hard to make it as a dairy farmer in the state of Vermont or anywhere. Heavily subsidized. This year we gave about $1 million more in loan protection for farmers. They're always coming to us saying the next milk price change is affecting them where they're going to go out of business, and we clearly value our farms for both the hard work they put in, the product they produce, the Vermont brand, but also the open space and the tourism that it brings into and the beauty it gives to the state of Vermont. One of the things we can do, we give a lot to an organization called the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. A lot of money, and one of their 50% housing and 50% farm preservation, land preservation. I've always advocated that we should tell that organization with the money we give them to put higher priority on preserving farms and buffer lands around streams and waterways. So if we're going to give our money, let's get a dual purpose for our buck. Not only keep the land open, but keep land open that's going to preserve our water quality. But we need to preserve agriculture, and I think we're doing it in a way to preserve the Vermont brand. I've been a big proponent and champion of farm to school, which I went to a thing at the Sustainable Academy here. I was blown away by these kids helping cooking, preparing, growing the food, and serving it to people like me, and them learning about nutrition in the process. So I hope we always stay an agricultural state.
Very good. Should we be an agricultural state, Phil?
Absolutely, but we have to be a much, much smarter agricultural state. So I did a term on the Agriculture Committee, and it seemed like there were two things that were keeping dairy farming alive. One was organic farming, because you could get a higher price for your product, and the other was migrant labor, which Vermont has become very dependent on. And without those two things, I think we would have seen a more spectacular collapse of the dairy industry. With that said, there's obviously a runoff problem that is killing small lakes and slowly killing our large lake. So if you look at Lake Carmi, they had a situation and continue to have a situation where relatively rapidly everybody realized that the lake was dying. And you had people from all branches of government, basically truck up there, stand at the lake, make vows, and then nothing happened. And it's shameful in its way. So I think we should have a kind of rapid response paradigm where we can, in that sort of a situation, there are dairy farms ringing the lake, and there should be a way to prevent them from using phosphorus. Now, the problem is that you have farmers who have to be held harmless in that circumstance. So there should be a contingency fund that can be tapped to keep those farmers afloat as we, on an emergency basis, take away their ability to use fertilizers that run off into that small lake. Now, obviously with Lake Champlain, you're dealing with huge amount of shoreline. You're dealing with different point sources of phosphorus, like Burlington's own runoff to the tune of millions of gallons of sewage in the lake. That needs a different solution, but we should have come up with the Lake Carmi solution this last term.
So we're actually going to stay on this a little bit. Michael, we'll have you answer this question. Are you pleased or happy with the solution that you've developed in terms of the financing for the lake cleanup, the Lake Champlain cleanup, of the deposit money that's been left on the table?
No, in fact, 2 years ago, I think, we, in the Senate, we almost passed what we called an acreage fee or a parcel fee, and we actually had, it was the concept of everybody in the state would contribute to the clean and healthy waterways of the state, based upon the size of the parcel they own. The minimum fee would be $15, what we were projecting, but you go up to 3,000 acre farms and they would pay a lot more. We actually had the agriculture community on board for that. We had every single major municipality on board for that, including Burlington. And we had a great deal of the public on board with that as well. And at the very end, the last administration, 11th hour killed the bill. And we have been struggling ever since to find a funding source for that. But we're going to have to find one soon, because the federal government will hold us accountable. And I still am of the belief that we have to find something that is universal, where we all contribute. Obviously, there should be greater contribution from those who have more impervious surfaces or more land where the runoff takes place, where the phosphorus runoff takes place. But we need a funding source like that, and we keep failing, and this is another example of where we were at odds with the governor this year. We had a plan in place from the treasurer's office, and he wanted to put it off because it was within his mantra of no new fees, no new taxes. Meanwhile, you can't say no new everything, especially when a crisis is evolving. And the longer you wait, the more it's going to cost you eventually.
The more it's going to cost us, Mike, or Phil, to clean up the lake? Are you happy with the funding that's been put in place to solve the problem?
Not at all. We did. Anthony Polina deserves great credit for, again, year after year after year, pushing to use the escheats, the uncollected deposits for bottles under our bottle bill law. That was to the tune of millions of dollars a year that was just going back to the distributors. And he put through a bill that redirected that to clean water. So shout out to Anthony Polina. With that said, a few million there. We have a property transfer tax that also is used for clean water. Those are drops in the bucket. You know, not to make a pun, but they really are very little in terms of the overall cost of this. Beth Pierce, as Michael mentioned, came up with a list of 3 or 4 places where we could really begin to realize some large-scale funding, and some of those would be directed at the polluter. So for instance, taxing phosphorus just seems like a no-brainer, but there's great resistance in the traditional farm community because they feel it's punishing farmers that are already on the edge. Again, I favor holding farmers harmless to the extent that we can, but there's a poison. We put it on the land, it runs into the lake. Common sense says you stop putting the poison on.
Stop putting the poison on, Val?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the monies that have been directed to cleaning up the lake? Is it enough in your viewpoint?
It's not enough. I've actually been talking to voters about this, and they bring it up when I was canvassing in Burlington, for example. I talked to somebody, and her #1 issue was the sewage going to the lake. It's a really hot summer, and people are frustrated every time they hear about all the problems that are going on in the lake, and they don't feel comfortable getting into it. I think maybe tax and regulate marijuana would be a good way to get short-term funding for that. Long-term, I'd love to have the access and sit down with Beth Pierce and come up with something. But I really like the idea of citizens taking care of the lake, giving a little bit, like even if it's half a penny towards the lake. If we're all engaged in cleaning up the lake, I think we can get there faster because people are getting very frustrated.
Very good. Phil, I'm going to go on with you here. Val just brought up something here that I think is really important, and that is the marijuana legislation that has gone into law. Do you see any potential revenue opportunities that the state really needs to take advantage of here with this?
Yes, but I would put revenue one tier down. I think the first thing you want to do is protect public health. And in the case of the tax and regulate bill we passed in the Senate, we plan to use the revenue in large part to address substance abuse issues. For instance, some of it would be diverted to the opiate epidemic. I think that makes great sense because it is a fact that marijuana will bring with it, like tobacco or alcohol, some social issues where you need to spend resources. So tax and regulate at this point seems like a no-brainer to me. The original estimate from the Rand report was that if we were the only state that legalized, we would realize on the order of $20-something million. We've not been the first state or the first country. We've got Canada has now legalized. So it'll be less than that. Our whole alcohol operation in Vermont nets us about $24 million that goes to the Ed Fund. So I imagine it would be a similar number for marijuana, somewhere around mid-20 million of dollars. That could be divided half to law enforcement and substance abuse programs and half to education, and I would be fine with that. If it were larger and Val's idea was proposed, I could see using it for water cleanup as well.
Very good. Val, marijuana legalization, your thoughts on it, the revenue opportunity, but as Senator Bruce stated, the public health protection element of it as well.
Yes. There's a lot of stigma when it comes to this sort of thing, and I don't know if you're going to get into the opioid crisis as well and the slippery slope that comes with that. But
well, why don't you take us there?
Okay. I'm actually very active on social media, and I'm noticing a lot of stigma when it comes to getting treatment for addiction, and everybody brings up the marijuana tax and regulate sliding right into people getting addicted to other forms of drugs. And the vitriol online is getting kind of horrific. People are being bullied. I am in support of safe injection sites and clean needle exchanges because I feel like people can't even get treatment if they're not alive to get it. I work in a library, and one of my coworkers had to save somebody's life. They called the UVM police. They had Narcan. I never thought that I worked at a library that I would have to know how to do any of that. That goes with gun violence too, by the way. We have to get trainings on gun violence too. But I just think that we need to think in terms of places where people can go to get safe injections and then work on treatment from there. And they need to be treated with humanity and respect because they're human beings.
Very good. Val Carzello, thank you. Michael, your thoughts on the marijuana legislation, the revenue opportunity before us, and the public health aspect of it as well?
So I voted for tax and regulate. I'm with Phil on this. It's not the revenue thing that drives it for me. It's the public health and safety, the possibility of having more resources to address the opiate situation, to make sure that we don't have marijuana and other drugs that are laced with fentanyl. And it just strikes me, you see all these other states passing various gradations of legalizing marijuana, whether it's decriminalization, legalization, tax and regulate. You don't see anybody going back. I think the experience is, it will take some maturing to get it right. I believe we should go slow, but I think we should do it. And I think the opiate situation, I want to say one thing about that because I made an indirect hit on Governor Shumlin when he pulled the plug on the parcel fee for cleaning up Lake Champlain. I want to give him credit for being ahead of his time on the opiate situation. 4 years ago, he devoted his whole State of the State speech to the opioid epidemic and took a lot of harassment for that, for highlighting Vermont having this problem. It turns out that New Hampshire's problem is even worse,
right,
and it exists all across the country. And journal after journal, I was privileged with Senator Ash to put a bill in 3 years ago to do an omnibus opiate treatment bill. And we started doing things like greater use of buprenorphine, greater prescription monitoring and the doses you could give out in terms of opioid pills, greater safe collection of unused pills. It hit the waterfront, and now we are recognized, even though we have a massive problem still ahead of us, we are recognized as one of the few states that's making a serious dent on progress in addressing the opiate problem. And I think we should give Governor Shumlin credit for that and the Vermont legislature for credit for that. We should give our state some credit for it without losing the energy we need and the resources we need to continue to address it.
I'm just going to follow up with you here. Val had made it an important point here, and I want to get both your sitting senators' opinion on this. Do you support safe injection sites, particularly in the city of Burlington? The city council has put forth that proposal, and they are studying it. What are your thoughts on that?
I do, and I salute Celine Colburn for advancing that. It's not an easy issue to advance, but I do think it is the right thing to do.
Okay. And Phil, your thoughts?
I agree, and I think actually that the council has it right. They've got it going forward, but it's not rushing forward. They're being very careful to examine the legal implications, the health implications, but I think everybody's signed on to the idea that this is part of treating this as a health emergency rather than a judicial and corrections emergency.
Can I add to that, actually?
Yes, please do.
People have kind of a not in my backyard kind of opinion when it comes to safe injection sites, and I grew up in Barrie, and we lived next to a playground where the needles were on the playground the next day. It's already in our backyard.
Wow, okay. We'll have one more question here before we ask each of you for closing comments, and I'll start with you, Val, with the final question here. Do you feel that state government, the Vermont state government, is serving its citizens well?
I think that they're trying. I feel like as a constituent sometimes it doesn't move fast enough. My husband and I both work full-time, and we've been priced out of 3 different places in Chittenden County, and it's getting harder to stay here by the day. And I understand that there's legislation in place and they're trying to help, but it just doesn't feel fast enough, and the sense of urgency isn't there. I'm watching students from all over the world leave. My husband watches his friends retire from the base, and they leave because the retirement isn't good enough. And I just feel like perception is reality. So although people are trying, the perception is that it doesn't feel like it. So there's a lot of frustration out there because of that. So I would hope that I can at least bring the listening aspect to governing, not that you don't listen, but one thing I have with the psychology background is I will listen, I understand where people come from, I'm there with you too. And I really think that we need to make sure that people understand that although we are trying, we need to get there faster.
Good points, Val. Thank you. Michael, your thoughts. Do you think the state government is meeting the needs of its citizens?
I think we do a pretty good job. I think probably better than most states. I think we can do better. I think that I don't think any politician wants to sit up here and say, pass more taxes, pass more fees, develop more resources, do this. I serve on the Finance Committee, and one of the things that frosts me is I see taxes that are already in place that go uncollected, that we can collect millions of dollars more to address the holes in state government, to address the holes that people face in their daily living. So we have things like millions and millions of dollars of traffic tickets that don't go collected. We have this burgeoning second home industry for VRBO and Airbnb, where people don't even know that they're supposed to collect taxes from the visitors. That costs us millions of dollars. Fortunately, we had a Supreme Court case that just came down that will allow us to start collecting taxes on internet sales that have gone uncollected but have been on our books. So instead of new taxes, I'm looking for places where we can collect existing taxes.
Phil, your thoughts. Do you think the Vermont state government is serving its citizens the best it can?
I think, as Michael said, I think we do a good job. I would go back to our discussion about the 2-year term. I think we do a good job of listening to our citizens partially because of the 2-year term. If we go to a 4-year term for governor, that discussion usually goes hand in hand with, well, shouldn't the Senate have 4-year terms and then the House have 2-year terms? First of all, difficult to get that past the House. But second of all, you would see, I think, a swing toward less visits in your community, less in the way of direct input. Michael chairs a committee, I chair the Education Committee. One thing that is a tradition in the State House that I'm very proud of is people can come into the committee rooms. They don't need permission. They can just come in and sit and listen. We're such a small state, and our discussions are open enough that people can get onto the agenda in my committee most days. So if somebody comes in and they're worked up about something and they want to talk to the committee, we're liable to hear from them almost immediately. If you're in California, you're in Massachusetts, that's a pipe dream. So again, smallness tends to be our saving grace.
Very good. Thank you, Phil. Time now for our final comments from our candidates, and Michael, we'll begin with you. 60 seconds for a final comment, please.
Well, as I started out saying, I view myself as, I could say a progressive, but more a populist. I have always worked for the little guy, for the consumer, and I'm in a position now as chair of the Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs Committee to take action on a lot of those consumer issues. And there's a lot of unfinished business. I hope to get back there. Paid family leave, minimum wage. I want to oversee data privacy, sexual harassment. We passed a lot of laws this year, and what the people don't really fully understand is when you pass the law, that's not the end of it. It's up to the legislature to oversee the executive branch to make sure they implement it in an efficient, aggressive fashion. And we need to watch particularly those bills that were not supported by the administration to make sure they get implemented correctly. And I hope to go back and do exactly that.
Very good. Phil, your final thoughts.
So I came 8 years ago now and did my first debate here. And during that debate, I said, if you send me to Montpelier, I'll do my best to make a difference. Right now I serve on education and economic development. I think those are the two best committees in terms of educating our kids and growing our economy. And I feel that I've had a certain impact on those committees. But the last thing I would hope you wouldn't forget from the beginning of our time here was what I said about gun safety. We finally managed, after 5 years of pushing, to make really historic progress on that. So I come to you now asking for another term, but with less potential and more actual change that I've brought to the table. So again, I ask for your vote.
Very good, Phil. Thank you. Val, your closing comments.
I'll reiterate what I said in my opening statement. I don't even need 60 seconds. I'm a unique candidate. I actually will listen to you. I believe our community and economy works better when we prop each other up and elevate each other, and I intend to do that. And I can't promise you the world, but I promise you I will try. Thank you.
Good. My thanks to all three of our candidates joining us for our candidate forum: Val Carzello from South Burlington, Michael Sirotkin from South Burlington, and Phil Baruth from Burlington. It takes a lot to put your name on a ballot. Be willing to sit here and go through a question and answer, and then to face the music on Election Day. And I thank all of you for the service that you give to the state of Vermont and for your willingness to serve. A reminder that we do have part 3 of our 2018 Chittenden County State Senator Democratic Primary Candidate Forum tomorrow night, when we're joined by Ginny Lyons, Chris Pearson, and Steve May. We hope you'll join us then. For all of us here at Channel 17 Town Meeting Television, I'm Matt Kelly. Thank you for watching.